I never thought a heating oil delivery would turn into a full-blown war. But when you live under an HOA run by a woman who thinks she's protecting the neighborhood from imaginary threats, even the most basic necessities become a battleground. My name is Vincent Ellison, and I bought my house in the Meadowbrook Estates development outside Burlington, Vermont 3 years ago. It was a beautiful colonial-style home with original hardwood floors, a wraparound porch, and most importantly, it was mine. The neighborhood was exactly what I was looking for after my divorce: quiet streets, mature trees, and houses that had character instead of the cookie-cutter sameness of newer developments. What I didn't realize when I signed those papers was that I was also signing up for monthly battles with Linda Patterson, the HOA president, who had appointed herself the guardian of neighborhood standards. Linda was 52 years old with that particular haircut that seemed to be issued along with HOA board positions: short, aggressively blonde, and styled in a way that defied both gravity and common sense. She wore pantsuits in aggressive colors like electric blue and hot pink, and she had this habit of knocking on your door at 7 in the morning if your trash can was still visible from the street at 6:59. I learned that lesson in my first week of ownership when she cited me for a violation because my contractor's truck had blocked part of the sidewalk while we were replacing the water heater. The first 2 years were manageable. I learned to follow the rules, even the ridiculous ones. No holiday decorations before Thanksgiving. No cars parked on the street overnight. Grass maintained between 2 and 3 inches in height, measured, I kid you not, with an actual ruler during Linda's weekend inspection walks. No flags except American flags, and those had to be mounted at the correct angle. No garden gnomes, no political signs, no wind chimes that could be heard from more than 10 feet away. The list went on, documented in a binder that Linda had compiled that was somehow even more restrictive than the original HOA covenant. But I dealt with it because the house itself was worth it. The bones were solid. The location was perfect for my commute to the engineering firm where I worked, and my neighbors were generally decent people who were just as worn down by Linda's reign as I was. We had an unspoken solidarity, exchanging knowing glances at HOA meetings and sharing war stories over beers in backyards that were carefully maintained to regulation standards. Everything changed in November when Vermont started experiencing what meteorologists were calling an unprecedented cold snap. Temperatures that should have been in the 30s were dropping into the teens, and the forecast was predicting it would only get worse. I had my heating oil tank filled in October like I did every year, but by mid-November, I was burning through it faster than expected. The cold was relentless, and my 1920s Colonial, charming as it was, had insulation that could charitably be described as vintage. I called Riverside Fuel Company on a Monday morning when I checked my tank gauge and saw I was down to a quarter full. In these temperatures, that would last me maybe a week, and the forecast was showing no signs of warming. The dispatcher told me they could get a truck out on Wednesday, which was perfect. I gave them my address, confirmed the delivery window, and went to work thinking I had handled a routine adult responsibility. Tuesday evening, I got a call from Riverside. "Mr. Ellison, we have a problem," the dispatcher said. Her name was Marie, and I had talked to her enough times over the years that we had a friendly rapport. "We received a formal complaint from your HOA president stating that oil delivery trucks are not permitted to enter the neighborhood." I actually laughed because I thought she was joking. "That's not possible. Half the houses here use oil heat. How would that even work?" I'm reading from an email we received from a Linda Patterson. She states that she's implementing a new policy where all deliveries must be pre-approved by the HOA board 72 hours in advance, and since your request didn't meet that timeline, we're not authorized to enter the property. The laughter died in my throat. Marie, I'm going to run out of oil. It's supposed to hit 5 degrees tonight. I understand, Mr. Ellison, and I'm very sorry, but our company can't risk violating HOA regulations. We've been sued before by an HOA in Montpelier for unauthorized entry, and it cost us $30,000 in legal fees. If you can get written approval from your HOA, we can schedule you for next available, which would be Friday morning. I hung up and immediately called Linda. It went to voicemail. I called again. Voicemail. I sent an email. I sent a text to the number listed on the HOA contact sheet. Nothing. I got in my car and drove to her house, which was the largest one in the development. Naturally, a sprawling craftsman that she and her husband had customized with every upgrade imaginable. I rang the doorbell and heard her small dog yapping inside, but no one came to the door even though her BMW was parked in the driveway and lights were on throughout the house. I went home and checked my HOA documents, pulling out the massive binder of rules and regulations. There was nothing about delivery trucks needing pre-approval, nothing about oil deliveries at all. I photographed every relevant page and sent them to Marie at Riverside, but she emailed back saying that without explicit HOA authorization, their company policy wouldn't allow the delivery. Wednesday morning, I woke up to a house that was noticeably colder. The thermostat read 62 degrees even though it was set to 68. I checked the tank. Below a quarter now. I bundled up in layers and went to work, but I couldn't concentrate. I sent another email to Linda, this one formally requesting emergency approval for the oil delivery. I CC'd the entire HOA board, which consisted of Linda and 2 other people who basically rubber-stamped whatever she wanted. Wednesday evening, I finally got a response. It was from Linda, and it was exactly what I expected and somehow worse than I imagined. Dear Mr. Ellison, your request for delivery approval has been received. However, the HOA board has recently implemented Policy 47B, which requires all commercial vehicle entries to be submitted for review no less than 72 hours prior to the requested date. This policy was enacted to maintain neighborhood aesthetics and prevent disruption to residents. Your request did not meet this timeline. Additionally, the board has concerns about potential property damage from heavy vehicles during winter conditions. Please resubmit your request with proper notice, and the board will review it at our next monthly meeting on December 3rd. Regards, Linda Patterson, HOA President. I read it 3 times and my blood pressure climbed with each reading. It was November 20th. December 3rd was nearly 2 weeks away. The temperature was supposed to drop below 0 by the weekend. This wasn't just bureaucratic nonsense anymore. This was dangerous. I called an emergency HOA meeting, which according to our bylaws could be requested by any homeowner with a legitimate safety concern. I sent the request via certified email to all board members at 8 p.m. Wednesday night. By Thursday morning, I had a response from Linda stating that emergency meetings required a 72-hour notice period, except in cases of natural disasters or property destruction. Freezing to death in my own home seems like a natural disaster to me, I wrote back. Your home has not been destroyed, and Vermont weather is not a natural disaster. It is a seasonal norm. Please plan accordingly in the future. I sat at my kitchen table Thursday morning, watching my breath create small clouds in the air, and something inside me shifted. I had tried to play by the rules. I had been patient and reasonable. I had followed every ridiculous regulation Linda had invented. And now, she was literally preventing me from heating my home in dangerous cold because I hadn't asked permission with the proper timeline. I got angry, but it was the cold kind of anger that leads to planning rather than yelling. I started making phone calls. First to a lawyer friend, Tom Chen, who specialized in property law. He listened to my situation and then asked me to send him all the documentation. "This is insanity," he said after reviewing everything. "There's nothing in your original HOA covenant about delivery approvals. She invented this policy and it's not enforceable. But here's the thing, Vincent, you could fight this in court and probably win, but that takes months. You need oil now." So what do I do? You could buy space heaters and electric blankets, run up your electricity bill to astronomical levels, and then sue the HOA for the difference. That's probably your best legal option. "Tom, my house is 2,500 square feet and the temperature is supposed to hit -5. Space heaters aren't going to cut it." He was quiet for a moment. "Then you need to find a way to get that oil delivery, even if it means breaking her made-up rules. Document everything. Save every email, every text, every communication, because when this is over, you're going to need it." I thanked him and hung up. Then I called Marie at Riverside again. "What if I met your truck outside the neighborhood and guided it to my house myself? Would that work?" "Mr. Ellison, I appreciate your creativity, but our driver can't enter an HOA that has formally banned us. If your HOA president calls the police and reports us for trespassing, that's a problem for our company." "What if she didn't know? I can't advise you to do anything illegal." "But hypothetically, your driver makes deliveries in the early morning, right? Before most people are awake." There was a long pause. "Our first delivery run starts at 5 a.m. I can't promise anything, but I also can't control whether our driver happens to be in your area tomorrow morning." I understood. "Thanks, Marie." I spent Thursday afternoon preparing. I checked Linda's schedule, which was predictably regimented. She left for her spin class at 5:30 every weekday morning and returned at 7. Her husband, Paul, left for work at 6:30. I confirmed this by casually driving past their house during those times over the past few months, not stalking. Just the kind of ambient awareness you develop when someone makes your life difficult on a regular basis. I set my alarm for 4:30 Friday morning. When it went off, I checked the temperature. -2 degrees, and the forecast predicted it would drop to -10 by that evening. Inside my house, even with every blanket I owned piled on my bed, the thermostat read 56 degrees. The pipes hadn't frozen yet, but I had been leaving faucets dripping as a precaution. I made coffee and waited in my truck with the heater running. At 5:15, the Riverside fuel truck turned onto my street with its lights off. I flashed my headlights once, and the driver pulled into my driveway. He was a guy named Pete who I had met on previous deliveries, mid-40s with a beard and a no-nonsense attitude. "This is the weirdest delivery I have ever made," Pete said as he climbed out of the truck. "Marie told me you're having HOA problems." "That's putting it mildly. Can we do this fast?" "Already on it." He worked efficiently, unspooling the hose and filling my tank. The pump was loud in the pre-dawn silence, and I kept watching the street for any signs of activity. House lights started coming on as people prepared for work. I saw a few neighbors peek through their curtains, but no one came out. The fill took 20 minutes. Pete handed me the receipt and I paid him immediately through their app. "You're all set. 800 gallons should get you through the worst of this cold snap." "Pete, I really appreciate this." "Hey man, people need heat. That's not negotiable. Good luck with your crazy HOA lady." He drove off just as the first hints of dawn started lightening the eastern sky. I went inside and cranked the thermostat up to 70. The furnace kicked on, and within an hour, the house felt human habitable again. I showered in actually hot water for the first time in 2 days and felt like I had won a small but significant victory. I should have known it wouldn't be that simple. At 8:30, my doorbell rang. Linda was standing on my porch in her post-workout athletic gear, her face flushed either from exercise or anger, possibly both. "You violated HOA policy," she said without preamble. "Good morning to you too, Linda. I'm not sure what you're talking about." "Don't play dumb, Vincent. My neighbor Mrs. Chen saw an oil truck in your driveway at 5:30 this morning. You deliberately circumvented the approval process." "I requested approval." "You denied it for a reason that isn't in our HOA covenant. So I handled a necessary home maintenance issue." "You are in direct violation of policy 47B. The HOA board will be issuing a fine of $500, and if you continue to disregard our authority, we will place a lien on your property." I had been expecting this, but hearing her actually say it still made my jaw clench. "Linda, it was -2 degrees this morning. My house was down to 56 degrees inside. Are you seriously telling me that I should have frozen because of a policy you invented last week?" "The policy is in place to protect property values and maintain neighborhood standards. Your inability to plan ahead is not my problem." "The policy isn't in the original covenant. You can't just make up rules and enforce them retroactively. As HOA president, I have the authority to implement reasonable policies for the good of the community. This has been approved by the board." "The board that consists of you and 2 people who agree with everything you say," her expression hardened. "You will receive the fine notice by certified mail. If you wish to dispute it, you can request a hearing at our next monthly meeting. Have a nice day, Vincent." She turned and walked back to her house, her yoga pants swishing with self-righteous fury. I closed my door and immediately called Tom. "She's threatening a lien over a policy she invented," I told him. "Can she actually do that, legally? Probably not, but she can make your life hell trying." HOAs have broad authority, and even when they overstep, it takes time and money to fight them. She's counting on you not having the resources or patience to push back. What if I do push back? Then document everything and prepare for a fight. But Vincent, there's something else you should know. I did some digging into your HOA's records. Linda Patterson has been president for 6 years, and in that time, she's issued over 200 violations and collected nearly $40,000 in fines. That seems excessive. It is excessive. And here's the interesting part. There's no clear accounting of where that money goes. HOAs are required to maintain financial records and report how funds are used, but your HOA's records are vague at best. Most of the fine money is listed as administrative expenses with no detail. Are you saying she's embezzling? I'm saying the books don't add up, and if someone were to request a formal audit, it might reveal some interesting information. I thought about this. How do I request an audit? You need 20% of homeowners to sign a petition. In your development, that's about 12 households. If you can get those signatures, the HOA is legally required to comply within 30 days. Linda's going to fight this. Absolutely. But if she's hiding something, she's going to fight it in a way that makes her look even more suspicious. Sometimes the cover-up is worse than the crime. I spent the rest of Friday reaching out to neighbors. I started with the people I knew best, the Johnsons 2 houses down, who had gotten a violation for their kids' basketball hoop being 3 inches over the regulation height. The Martinses across the street, who had been fined for planting tulips in a color that Linda deemed too vibrant. And the elderly Mr. Kowalski, who had received a citation for his American flag being a quarter-inch smaller than regulation size. Everyone had a story. Everyone had been bullied, fined, or harassed by Linda over something trivial, but when I mentioned the audit petition, people got nervous. "I don't want to make trouble," Mrs. Johnson said. "We're planning to sell next year, and if Linda makes things difficult—" "She's already making things difficult," I pointed out. "This is about holding her accountable." By Saturday evening, I had 8 signatures. I needed 4 more. The temperature had dropped to -8, and the weather forecast was predicting -12 overnight. My house was warm and comfortable, but I kept thinking about what would have happened if I hadn't gotten that delivery. The pipes would have frozen. I would have been miserable and potentially unsafe in my own home. All because Linda Patterson wanted to flex her authority. Sunday morning, I was walking back from checking my mailbox when I noticed something odd. Linda's house, which was usually immaculate, had icicles forming along the gutters in a strange pattern. More significantly, I could see her breath when she came out to get her newspaper. I walked past on my usual route and felt the air near her property. It was noticeably colder around her house than the ambient temperature. Her heat was out. I confirmed it Monday morning when I saw a service van from Arctic Home Services parked in her driveway. The technician was there for 3 hours. I happened to be getting my mail when he left, and we struck up a conversation. "Big job?" I asked. "Furnace completely died," he said, shaking his head. "And with these temperatures, that's no joke. I got it running again, but it's on its last legs. They need a replacement, but that's a week-long job minimum with permits and everything." "Did they run out of oil?" "No, mechanical failure. The thing is 20 years old and just gave up." I told them they should have replaced it 3 years ago during that last cold snap, but nobody wants to spend 15 grand on a furnace until they have to. I thanked him and went back inside, processing this information. Linda's furnace had failed during the coldest weather Vermont had seen in decades. The universe had a sense of irony. Monday evening, I got the certified letter Linda had promised. $500 fine for unauthorized commercial vehicle entry in violation of HOA policy 47B. The letter stated I had 30 days to pay or face additional penalties, including potential legal action. I didn't pay it. Instead, I doubled down on the petition. I went door to door in the freezing cold and told people exactly what had happened. I showed them the email chains, the documentation, the fact that Linda had nearly forced me into a dangerous situation over a made-up rule. The temperature that week stayed dangerously cold, and people were scared. The idea that the HOA president could prevent necessary deliveries hit differently when it was -10 outside. By Wednesday, I had 15 signatures. I submitted the petition formally through certified mail to the HOA board and CC'd all the members. Per Tom's advice, I also sent a courtesy copy to the Vermont Attorney General's office, which had a division that handled HOA disputes. Linda called an emergency HOA meeting for that Saturday. The email she sent was polite, but terse, stating that recent petition activities have necessitated a community discussion regarding HOA governance and member responsibilities. The meeting was held in the community clubhouse, a building that was technically owned by the HOA and used for monthly meetings and occasional neighborhood events. When I arrived, the parking lot was fuller than I had ever seen it. Word had spread, and people were interested. Linda sat at the head table with her 2 board members, Richard Santos and Margaret Crawford. Richard was a retired accountant who mostly stayed quiet, and Margaret was a retired teacher who seemed to genuinely believe Linda was doing a good job. Behind them, was a projection screen showing the HOA budget, which I noticed was suspiciously vague in its categories. "Thank you all for coming," Linda began. "We're here to address concerns raised by Mr. Ellison regarding HOA financial management and policy implementation. I want to assure everyone that this HOA operates with complete transparency and in accordance with all applicable laws." I raised my hand. "Linda, if we operate with complete transparency, why are $40,000 in fines over the past 6 years listed simply as administrative expenses with no breakdown? Those funds are used for community maintenance, legal consultations, and operational costs. Can you provide receipts?" Financial records are maintained in accordance with our bylaws, which state that homeowners can request detailed accounting. I'm requesting it now in front of everyone. Linda's jaw tightened. "The audit you've requested will be conducted by a third-party firm within the required 30-day timeline. All financial information will be provided at that time." "Great. In the meantime, can you explain Policy 47B, which isn't mentioned anywhere in our original HOA covenant?" "The board has the authority to implement reasonable policies as needed to maintain community standards." "Did the board vote on this policy?" "The board approved it unanimously." I looked at Richard and Margaret. "Did you two actually vote on a policy requiring 72-hour notice for delivery trucks?" Richard looked uncomfortable. "Linda handles most of the day-to-day policy decisions. We trust her judgment." "So that's a no." "Linda created this policy unilaterally and then enforced it in a way that could have caused serious harm to my property and safety." The room erupted in murmurs. People started talking over each other, sharing their own stories of questionable fines and arbitrary rules. Mrs. Martinez stood up and described being fined $300 for a garden gnome that her granddaughter had placed in the yard. Mr. Kowalski detailed his flag citation and the subsequent $50 fine when he failed to replace it within 72 hours. Linda tried to regain control. "Everyone please calm down. These policies exist to maintain property values. If we allow the neighborhood to decline into chaos, everyone's investment suffers." "My investment is suffering because you fined me $500 for heating my home," I shot back. "And I noticed that your house had a heating emergency this week too. Did you file for emergency approval to have the repair truck enter the neighborhood?" The room went silent. Linda's face flushed. "That was a legitimate emergency. And mine wasn't. The difference is that I was proactive and arranged a delivery before my system failed. You let yours fail and then needed emergency service. But somehow, I'm the one getting fined. This is not about my personal property management. It absolutely is. You're holding everyone else to standards you don't follow yourself, and you're collecting fines that disappear into vague budget categories." Margaret spoke up, and for the first time, she sounded uncertain. "Linda, maybe we should have been more involved in the financial oversight. If there are questions, we should address them." "There are no questions," Linda said sharply. "Mr. Ellison is simply upset about facing consequences for his actions, and he's trying to create a distraction." Tom, who had come to the meeting as my legal advisor, stood up. "Mrs. Patterson, I'm Tom Chen, Mr. Ellison's attorney. I've reviewed your HOA's financial records, and I have to say that they raise significant red flags. The lack of detailed accounting for fine revenue violates Vermont's HOA transparency laws. Additionally, implementing policies that aren't in the original covenant and enforcing them with fines is a violation of contractual obligations. My client has every right to refuse payment, and if you proceed with legal action or a lien, we'll countersue for harassment and seek damages." Linda's face had gone from flushed to pale. "This meeting is over." "Actually," Tom continued, "under Vermont law, this meeting can't be adjourned until all homeowner concerns raised on the agenda have been addressed, and the petition for an audit is on the agenda. The audit will be conducted as required by law." "Excellent. We'll be monitoring that closely. Also, I should mention that a copy of all relevant documentation has been provided to the Vermont Attorney General's office. They've expressed interest in reviewing HOA governance practices in this community." That was news to me, but Tom's face was perfectly composed. Linda gathered her papers with shaking hands. "If there are no further legitimate concerns, I'm closing this meeting." She walked out of the clubhouse, followed by a confused-looking Margaret and Richard. The remaining homeowners erupted into conversation, people clustering in groups and discussing what had just happened. Mrs. Johnson approached me. "Vincent, I had no idea things were this bad." "Thank you for standing up to her." "We all need to stand up to her," I said. "This only works if we stick together." Over the next week, things escalated quickly. The audit firm, a company called Granite State Financial Review, contacted the HOA and scheduled an initial meeting to discuss record access. Linda tried to delay it, citing various procedural concerns, but Tom filed a motion with the local court to compel compliance. The judge, apparently unimpressed with Linda's arguments, gave the HOA 72 hours to provide all requested documents. During this time, the temperature finally started to climb back to seasonal norms. By the end of January, we were seeing highs in the 20s and 30s, which felt tropical compared to the negative temperatures we had endured. My heating oil was holding steady, and my house had remained comfortable throughout the cold snap. Linda's house, however, was having ongoing problems. I noticed multiple service vehicles over the following weeks. According to neighborhood gossip, which was flowing freely now that people felt emboldened to talk, her furnace had failed again, and they were in the middle of a complete replacement. The job had hit complications because of code upgrades required for the new system, and the contractors had found additional issues with her ductwork. I didn't take pleasure in her discomfort exactly, but I also didn't feel bad about it. She had tried to prevent me from getting necessary heating oil during dangerous cold. The fact that she was now experiencing heating problems herself while facing accountability for her HOA management felt like the universe balancing its books. The audit results came back on February 14th, and they were damning. Granite State Financial Review had found irregularities totaling over $32,000. Funds designated for community maintenance had been used for personal expenses, including landscaping improvements to Linda's property, purchases from home improvement stores that couldn't be tied to any community projects, and regular payments to a consulting firm that turned out to be a company owned by Linda's husband. Tom called me as soon as the report was released. "Vincent, this is worse than I thought. She wasn't just sloppy with the books. She was actively stealing from the HOA. What happens now?" "The HOA has to report this to law enforcement. It's not optional. This is embezzlement, and it crosses the threshold for felony charges in Vermont." 2 days later, a Vermont State Police investigator contacted the HOA board. I learned about this through Richard Santos, who called me sounding shaken. "I had no idea," he said. "Margaret and I signed off on budgets, but Linda always said she had the receipts and documentation. We trusted her. You didn't verify. We should have. God, we should have. But she was so confident and she always had an answer for everything. I feel like an idiot." "You're not an idiot. You were manipulated by someone who was very good at manipulation. What's the board going to do?" Linda resigned this morning. via email. She's lawyered up and refusing to communicate directly. Margaret and I are cooperating fully with the investigation, and we've scheduled an emergency election for new board members. Vincent, would you consider running for president? I thought about it. Let me get through this investigation first. But yeah, I would consider it. Someone needs to fix this mess. The investigation moved forward through February and into March. Detectives reviewed financial records, interviewed board members and homeowners, and built a case against Linda. Her husband Paul was also investigated for his role in the fake consulting company, though it appeared he might have genuinely believed it was legitimate work. The criminal charges were filed on March 23rd. Linda Patterson was charged with 2 counts of felony embezzlement and 1 count of fraud. The prosecution alleged that over a period of 6 years, she had stolen approximately $32,000 from the HOA through various fraudulent schemes. If convicted, she faced up to 10 years in prison and substantial fines. The neighborhood reacted with a mixture of vindication and shock. Some people had suspected Linda was corrupt, but others genuinely believed she had been acting in the community's best interest, however misguided her methods. The revelation that she had been stealing the whole time changed the narrative entirely. I received a formal apology letter from the interim HOA board, which now consisted of Richard, Margaret, and a new member named David Patel, who had volunteered to help clean things up. The letter acknowledged that the $500 fine issued to me had been improper. That policy, 47B, was not valid or enforceable, and that the board would be conducting a comprehensive review of all fines issued during Linda's tenure. We recognize that members of this community have been subjected to unfair treatment and financial penalties under the previous administration, the letter read. We are committed to making this right and rebuilding trust in HOA governance. They refunded my $500 plus interest. They also announced a community meeting to discuss reforming the HOA bylaws to include stronger financial oversight, clearer policy-making procedures, and term limits for board positions. The criminal case against Linda moved through the court system slowly, as these things do. Her lawyer tried to negotiate a plea deal, but the prosecution wasn't particularly interested in going easy on someone who had abused a position of trust to steal from her neighbors over multiple years. The case was scheduled for trial in September. Meanwhile, the HOA held elections in May. I ran for president along with 2 other candidates, and in a result that I took as a strong vote of confidence from my neighbors, I won with 68% of the vote. My platform had been simple: transparency, accountability, and common sense. No more arbitrary rules. No more treating homeowners like criminals for living their lives. No more HOA president acting like a dictator. My first act as president was to commission a full review of every policy Linda had implemented. We found dozens of rules that had no basis in the original covenant and were often contradictory or impossible to enforce. We eliminated 90% of them and rewrote the rest to be clear, reasonable, and actually useful for maintaining property values without making people miserable. We also implemented monthly financial reports that were posted on a community website, showing exactly how HOA funds were collected and spent. Every expense over $500 required approval from the full board, and receipts had to be provided for everything. The days of mysterious administrative expenses were over. Linda's trial began on September 8, 2026. I attended the first day along with several other homeowners. The prosecution laid out a detailed case showing how Linda had systematically stolen from the HOA, using her position of authority to cover her tracks, and intimidate anyone who asked questions. The defense tried to argue that she had simply been disorganized, and that the missing money was due to poor record-keeping rather than criminal intent, but the evidence was overwhelming. The fake consulting company alone accounted for $18,000 in fraudulent payments. Receipts showed that Linda had purchased materials for her own home improvement projects and charged them to the HOA. She had even paid for a landscaping renovation at her property using community funds, claiming it was necessary to maintain neighborhood standards. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. They found Linda guilty on all counts. Sentencing was scheduled for October. I wasn't at the sentencing hearing, but Tom attended and called me afterward with the details. The judge had not been sympathetic. Linda was sentenced to 4 years in prison, ordered to pay full restitution of $32,000 plus legal fees, and given 3 years of probation after her release. Her husband, Paul, who had cooperated with investigators and appeared to have been genuinely unaware of the extent of Linda's fraud, received probation and community service. The judge said something interesting, Tom told me. He said that HOAs serve an important function in communities, but when individuals abuse that authority for personal gain, it undermines the entire system. He wanted to send a message that this kind of behavior has serious consequences. 4 years seems harsh, I said, though I didn't feel particularly sorry for her. The judge noted that this was a betrayal of trust over an extended period with multiple victims. That's an aggravating factor. Also, Linda showed no remorse during the trial. She maintained that she had done nothing wrong and that everyone was overreacting. That didn't play well. After the call, I sat in my living room, warm and comfortable in the house I had fought to keep livable. Outside, autumn was turning the Vermont hills into a riot of orange and red. The neighborhood was quieter now, more peaceful. People were actually talking to each other instead of living in fear of the next violation notice. The new HOA board was functional and boring in the best possible way. We handled actual problems like road maintenance and snow removal. We organized community events that people actually wanted to attend. We stayed out of people's personal business unless it genuinely affected the neighborhood. I never forgot those days in November when the temperature dropped below 0 and Linda tried to prevent me from getting heating oil. The memory of that cold house, the frustration of dealing with her arbitrary authority, and the realization that sometimes you have to fight back against petty tyranny, all of that stayed with me. But I also remembered that strange twist of fate when her own furnace failed during the same cold snap. She had spent so much energy controlling everyone else that she had neglected her own situation. And when her system failed, she learned what I had already known, that heat isn't a luxury in Vermont winter. It's survival. The universe has a way of teaching lessons to those who need them most. Linda Patterson had tried to rule the neighborhood like a fiefdom, extracting fines and imposing her will while enriching herself at everyone else's expense. In the end, her own choices brought her down. The fake policies, the stolen money, the refusal to treat people with basic decency, all of it caught up with her. As for me, I served 2 terms as HOA president before stepping down to let new people take over. I had proven my point and fixed the systems that needed fixing. The neighborhood was healthy again, and I could go back to being a regular homeowner instead of a reformer. My heating oil deliveries came twice a year without incident. No permission slips, no arbitrary approval processes, just a truck pulling up, filling my tank, and going on to the next customer. It was beautifully mundane. Sometimes I saw Paul Patterson around town. He had sold their house and moved to a smaller place across town after Linda went to prison. We didn't talk much, but he nodded when we passed each other, and I returned the gesture. He had been a victim too, in his way. Not everyone married to a Karen realizes what's happening until it's too late. The house stayed warm through the following winters. I upgraded the insulation and installed a new high-efficiency furnace that cost a fortune but paid for itself in reduced oil consumption. I dated a woman named Sarah for a while, though that didn't work out. I got promoted at work. Life went on as it does, but I never forgot the lesson of that November cold snap. When someone tries to control you through artificial authority, when they use made-up rules to exercise power over your basic needs, you have to push back. Not just for yourself, but for everyone else they're hurting too. Linda Patterson spent 4 years in prison thinking about that lesson. I spent those same years living in a neighborhood that had learned to govern itself with common sense instead of tyranny. I know which outcome I prefer. The Meadowbrook Estates, HOA, still exists, but it's a different organization now. We maintain standards without being oppressive. We handle problems without treating people like criminals. We manage money honestly and show everyone where it goes. Revolutionary concepts, apparently. On cold nights when the wind howls outside and the furnace kicks on to keep the house warm, I sometimes think about Linda knocking on my door that morning after I got my oil delivery. The fury in her face, the absolute certainty that she had the right to control even this most basic aspect of homeownership. She had been so sure of her power. She learned otherwise. So did everyone else who thought they could use HOA authority to bully their neighbors. The heat works fine now. The HOA works fine now. And Linda Patterson learned that karma can be as cold as a Vermont winter when you've spent years making other people's lives harder than they need to be. I still live in the same house, still love the neighborhood, and still pay my HOA dues. The difference is that now the money goes toward actual community needs instead of funding someone's personal enrichment scheme. We fixed the playground equipment last year and repaved the community parking area. We're planning to upgrade the clubhouse heating system next year, ironically enough, because the current one is inefficient and old. Life is good. The house is warm. The neighborhood is healthy. And somewhere in a minimum security facility in Vermont, Linda Patterson has 4 years to think about how she got there. It all started with a simple heating oil delivery and a Karen who thought she could stop it. In the end, she stopped nothing except her own freedom. The oil flowed, the heat worked, and justice, cold and inexorable as a Vermont winter, caught up with someone who had spent too long avoiding it. I made it through that record cold snap. Linda didn't make it through the consequences of her own actions. And that, as they say, is that.